what we're seeing now with all the havoc and horror and violence is the return of the repressed, stemming from the monotheist indoctrination for generations, for hundreds of years, for millennia. And it's really sad. And that's why I think that there are so many things going on.
Carl Abrahamsson, it's really nice to have you back on the podcast.
Thank you very much. Nice to be back.
We're here to talk about the film Midsommar, and I couldn't think of a better person to talk to about this Swedish folk horror film than a Swedish occultist.
Well, thank you. It's an interesting thing. First of all, it's a great film, but as you know, I recently had a talk or a lecture at Morbid Anatomy specifically about this film because, yeah, I mean, it's an amazing film. But the more I had watched it, several times, the more stuff, was creeping up from, my unconscious, or possibly from the collective unconscious, or possibly from the unconscious of the film,
Hmm.
or all of those things. And it just, I don't know, it just dawned on me that there's a lot here. I started scraping the surface and I found a lot of interesting stuff, which, usually happens when you actively look at a film with some kind of analytical goggles on. I love to do that.
Yeah, I've really enjoyed that as well, and I've started a bit of a series here on the podcast because that's the way I've started to look at films over the past number of years. And like you said, especially when revisiting them with that intention to do some analysis to see what's underneath the surface text. Before we get going, though, I just want to give a little cheers. I have here a tea with special properties,
All right.
and that would be
I
uh,
don't.
no
But
special
cheers anyway.
properties.
This
Skål.
is, yeah, Skål. Just plain water. Mm.
Ah, well, I don't want to have a bad trip. Um, yeah, if you've seen the film, then you know what I'm referencing there.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what's your history with this film?
Well, there is an interesting thing that popped up, when I started thinking about it. First of all, I think my wife and I we were in Ireland at the time when the film came out, 2019, and I'd heard about it and we had watched Hereditary and loved it. And I thought, well, let's just watch this film. It's supposed to be in Sweden and it's that's weird folk horror. And yeah, and I mean, it's kind of, love at first sight. We're both horror film fans and it was so well done, etc. And then, gradually, um, when I started re-watching it, which was probably many years later, maybe about a year ago, I watched it again a couple of times, and it dawned on me that, whoa, what's going on here? Is he sort of does he have a goal with this, or is it just a crass horror film? It is a very good horror film, but is it filled with, cultural appropriation and these sort of very, sensitive things that you don't really think about because of the fact that it's Sweden, right? And Sweden is like, part of what's in movie anthropology is called the white gaze, usually goes out from this Western European, Northern European, American perspective. But that the film in itself has a lot of cultural appropriation, and of course there's poetic license. You can do these things, but it started. It awoke something in me that whether or not this film could be what I call a part of an occulturation, meaning things that are moving from the occult spheres and into the mainstream. And I argue that films like this and many other things, pop occult stuff, folk horror, art historical stuff that focuses on occult stuff, it's all part of this occulturation. And I argue that it is because of this thing that Jung called the collective unconscious. It's telling us something that we need to look at the world and ourselves in a much more magical way, in a way, with magical thinking, magical analysis, magical ritual, to, in a way, not just intellectually enchant the world, as it has been talked about in the academic world, but for real, get into a new perspective, a new mind frame that also involves, behavioral changes. So I think that this film, whether Ari Aster agrees or not, is a part of an occulturation that is going on. And in that sense, I think that it appears to be a film that is critical of the things that are going on, in this Swedish village or cult or whatever you want to call it. But I argue from that point of view that it's actually more like a commercial, it's more of a positive thing that is shown, because sometimes that backfires. The author or the director or scriptwriter may have had one vision of showing how horrible certain things are, but the beauty of the execution affect people can affect people in the opposite way, meaning kids who watch this will say, this is so incredibly beautiful, this is so cool, this cult is doing some great stuff. And then you have that revealing moment, which amplifies both my own point of view, but also the fact that Aster is fairly conscious of this. And that's the fact that when Dani, the protagonist, has been crowned as the new May Queen, she gives that smile, right?
Mhm.
She's not crying anymore. That smile, then the film ends. So she's at peace. She found her new family. She found her new home. And thereby her possible critique that she certainly had earlier on in the film of the goings on, it's gone. Because she has
Mhm.
been lauded. She has been elevated to not only as a part of that cultic family, but also to the pinnacle. She's the new May Queen. So yeah, there's a
Yeah.
lot to unravel in this film, and that's true for and with all great films, and it is a great film. And again, my take on it is that it is part of an overall general occulturation process that is way, way, way more powerful and way beyond individual creativities, like the
Mhm.
work of one director. This is much more immersive and collective.
Yeah, I rewatched it last night, and it was, I think, my third or fourth viewing of it. And some of the kind of deeper themes of the film really came to the surface for me in this rewatch. That smile at the end, to me,
Mhm,
speaks to Danny's newfound sense of belonging.
mhm.
And I think, from a specifically Anglo North American perspective, I know that this is something that I've dealt with in my life, and I know many other kind of displaced European North Americans have also experienced the sense of belonging to a place and to a culture and tradition. I mean, and it weaves into her experience of trauma and how we deal with trauma in our society
Yeah.
versus how traditional societies deal with trauma.
Mhm.
In our and you see this at the beginning of the film, after the death of Danny's parents and her sister, she's very much isolated. She's going to her individual therapy. She's prescribed psychopharmaceuticals. No one around here really wants to deal with her grief. She doesn't know how to deal with it. So she's very isolated. And
Mhm.
then when she gets to this cult, everything is centered around communitas, around
Mhm.
shared experience, whether that's the sexual rites, the sacrificial rites,
The psychedelic
and
ones.
the psychedelic ones, and even the grieving rituals where
Yeah.
everybody is wailing together. And so she's never
Yeah.
alone with her grief there.
Right.
So that
Exactly.
smile to me is so, I found it so kind of touching and profound
Mhm.
because
Yeah.
I long for that too.
Yeah. 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 No, I agree. And for me, that again, like you said, like rewatching it and thinking about that smile, that sort of saved the film, because if it hadn't been there, then for me it would have been more of a crass horror film. Where
Mm,
everything was just like American girl gets cajoled or co-opted into this European cult, whatever. But the smile changes everything, and I think it's also interesting from a kind of symbolic point of view that these guys, the American guys, the academics, they're such duds. And of course, her boyfriend is the ultimate dud dude, who is also called Christian, right? So the
Yeah.
Christian fails her in all regards, and he is the one that gets sacrificed at the end in the burning, pyramidal house, which of course echoes and evokes the beautiful scene in The Wickerman. I mean, there's a lot of kinship there, where the Christian policeman gets sacrificed for the well-being of the community. And I think it's of course a reference to this kind of film. It's a beautiful reference, and I think it's really powerful stuff.
Mm.
And of course, also the fact that Pelle's parents had both died, and that's their deep connection with him and Dani, that they have both lost both parents. And then, it emerges that Pelle's parents were actually burnt in an earlier ritual in that house. And it's just, I don't know, it's so intelligently put together. And I do have a funny story that emerged also when I was looking back at the film and thinking about it. And I had this sort of creeping feeling, and I got the book. I don't have that right now, but there's last year there was a book published with Aster's manuscript and some stuff about the
Mm.
music. Quite a beautiful book that I can recommend, because he's also written the script in a more literary sense, not like a literary work, but there's a lot of description in there that you don't see in the film. You see it, of course, in the scenes, but it's interesting to see how he has described things.
Mm.
But what I found in the book was that obviously this is a co-production between Sweden and the US and possibly other people, and the main producing company, called Be Real, is a Swedish production company. And according to Aster, he at that time, after Hereditary, wanted to make a breakup movie, and of course this is a breakup movie in a way, but the impetus or the idea of having a gang of Americans come to Sweden and get butchered came from this Swedish production company. And they had not even seen Hereditary. They had read the script or whatever, and approached Aster saying, we want something similar, a horror film where American kids go to Sweden and get slaughtered. So what struck me then, oh, wait, Be Real. I recognize this name. And then I looked back, email correspondence and my files and stuff. I had actually given a lecture for a Be Real, kickoff or corporate party that they had in 2013. I'd forgotten about that. I remember doing it, but not that it was them. So this was 2013, and the theme of the lecture or talk was, since they were, they are film producers, I spoke about the impact of the Swedish sin. The fact that Sweden was so liberal in the 1960s, and that also reflected in the films that were produced in Sweden during the 60s. Uh, Actually from the 50s and onwards, but specifically towards the mid 60s, and how that helped change censorship laws, for instance, in the US,
Mm.
because the Hays Code was active all the way up until the 60s, when it gave way for the Motion Picture Association of America and this sort of age thing, where you have 17, R-rated, X-rated, etc. That happened when this influx of European and specifically Swedish films challenged, even to the point of going into the courts, saying, is this obscene or is this not obscene? Meaning, the Swedish films showed people who are having sex on screen, and they were first, they were banned, and then the producers or importers pushed it to a legal challenge. And there was one film in particular, Vilgot Sjömans I Am Curious Yellow from 1967, that I think broke through in America in 1969, and it generated something like, crazy $20 million for this kind of independent alternative, like French new wave film set in Sweden where people have sex. So that kind of approach to nature, to things like sex, and it's very, very was natural for us, but certainly not for the Americans. So this concept of the Swedish sin or Swedish cinema and then of course Danish pornography and all this sort of Scandinavian stuff helped change the mind frame of I wouldn't say the movie industry per se, but certainly the fact that you could, although you got an X rating, but you could still show sex and hardcore stuff on in cinemas.
Mm.
So that was interesting, and that made me think, could it be that I, in a way, maybe this is hubris, that I sort of sowed my little seed there during that lecture, talking about this thing, because I didn't perceive that a new generation of producers really knew this stuff, which is weird because they're Swedish, but that's just how it is. So in my own mind, I constructed this thing that maybe it affected them so that they, during the years that followed, felt that they wanted to make something weird and sexual and Swedish, which had this meeting between square Americans meeting the Swedish culture, where people live together and they have sex and all this stuff. And I thought about it specifically in that scene where, again, Christian, when he's high, he gets chosen to impregnate the beautiful redhead of the cult, and that scene is so hilarious when these young and old witches are trying to help him conceive together with the redhead. And for me, it made a lot of sense that there is this kind of romance or romantic notion about the Swedish sin and sort of this liberal attitude and blonde beautiful girls and whatever. And I think
Hmm.
the film as such exploits that in a way. That maybe not cultural appropriation, but it does exploit the fact that that's how people look at Swedes in a way,
Mm.
or certainly they have. So that was one
Yeah.
little
Hmm.
I don't know,
Yeah.
sideline that I found amusing.
Yeah, that is interesting. I hadn't thought of that, making that connection to the Swedish liberal view of sex. Like growing
Hmm.
up in the 80s and 90s, I remember seeing the vintage pornos from
Exactly.
Sweden,
Yeah.
these short little reels
Yeah.
that came out in the 70s and 80s. Um, it, it's made explicit in the film when the one girl comes up to Christian and she gives him the drink and she says
Hmm.
this will help to lower your inhibitions.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he's got such fear around that. He says, "Well, I don't,
Hmm.
like I said in the beginning, I don't want to have a bad trip. Like
Right.
if I
Exactly.
let down my guard, there's the fear that
Hmm.
I'm not going to be in control, that I might have a bad trip." And well, of course, he has a mixed trip. There's
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
moments of ecstasy and a
Yeah.
moment of terror at the end,
Yeah.
for sure.
Absolutely. And also he's exposed to advanced, pagan sex magic, in the sense that that same girl leaves her pubic hair in this pie that might be, a cannibalistic pie. But anyway, he gets that too, and he takes it out. It looks like a pube, and everyone goes, ooh. But for the
Hmm.
cult in itself, it's even depicted in these beautiful tapestries or mural paintings when they arrive at the thing. You can see the entire what's going to happen is already scripted. So in
Hmm.
that sense, there's no doubt about it. Pelle was out to scout in the world to bring these people in these types or characters specifically to fulfill the destiny of this solar ritual that only happens, I think, every 90th year, according to their own mythology. So it's not random in any way at all. They're all um, picked and chosen for their purposes. And I
I
think it's kind of like an initiation specifically for Dani, because if she gets projected on, yeah, she could be the one, she still has to win that dance, and she still has to
mhm.
show that she's worthy. Otherwise, I think she would have been, killed off also.
Hey, I want to take a moment to speak with you about this channel. Currently, only 11% of viewers are subscribed to the channel. I think those numbers are terrible. So, if you're enjoying this content and you want to help out the channel, please take a moment right now to like this video and subscribe. And if you really want to help out the channel, you can become a member of the Howl in the Wilderness Patreon, which will give you access to early release of full ad-free episodes, plus access to the archive of the first 100 episodes of this podcast. It would really help me out and allow me to keep creating content like the interview that you're watching right now. Okay, thanks so much. Now, back to the interview. Mm. I wonder how conscious Pele was about his role in it all, because at one point one of the elders says to him, I want to congratulate you on your unclouded intuition in bringing these
Hmm.
people to us. Like, so I
Right.
wonder, yeah, if he was really conscious of it or if he was just more of a pawn in the whole kind of supernatural play of it.
Mm. I think he was very conscious of it, and I think even unconsciously so, meaning that he since they had this division of the age phases, from 0 to 72 years old. I think was it like 18-year phases? One phase,
1836.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And
Mm,
and that was during his phase, you go out in the world to sort of basically like the Christian thing to do missionary work in a way. But his
mm,
mission is not to, but in a way, he told these anthropology students about his place Horga, and that obviously attracted the guy, what's his name, Josh, to want to write about it, and also Christian, and they have this clash um, when they're there. They both want to write about it. So I think that Pelle is, if not 100% conscious of the fact, meaning manipulating them, then at least 50%, and the rest is just intuition doing his elders' work in a way.
mhm. Yeah. Going back to like Danny's whole journey throughout this movie and, culminating in the smile at the end, this beatific smile.
Hmm.
Um, I read an interview with Ari Aster that I thought was just like a perfect summation of the film in a way. He said that for the guys in the film, it's a folk horror movie, but for
Hmm.
Danny, it's a kind of fantasy or fairy tale.
Hmm. Hmm.
And watching it last night with those two different perspectives on it, it was really clear that she was on a completely different journey, having a different experience throughout this
Hmm.
than the guys who went through this
Yeah.
horrible ordeal.
Yeah, no, absolutely. In a way, it's like she's the one doing the hero's journey, the Campbell thing, the what is called the monomyth. She's doing that whole trip, whereas the others, the guys, are basically just like pawns um, to aid her, even though they don't want to do it in the beginning. They think that she's too, clingy in her grief. But Pelle is also the one, I think, greasing the machinery there and making sure that she actually comes along. And also, he had magically drawn her face right as a birthday gift,
Mm,
or something. Can't remember what the occasion was, but he had sort of invested of his own creativity and his own libido in a way in making that portrait of her. So yeah, it's yeah, of course, it's really about her and her journey. Everything else is just um, helpers helpers.
mm,
And of course, eventually the helpers are no longer needed, and she has again like a new family, not the dysfunctional, depressed, medicated, violent, um, kind of typical um, American nightmare in a way, but rather sun-loving, nature-loving, living in harmony with nature, bright, artistic, sexual, psychedelic. And I mean, I think those scenes are so beautiful when they come first and they are immediately offered the mushrooms. And then is that the hand or is it the feet? Anyway, first it's the hand, and then when she's about to dance, it's the grass comes up through her feet,
mhm,
or it's vice versa maybe. But anyway, that kind of connection to
mhm,
nature as such and the earth is really beautiful, and that again decimates my possible critique of, this is like, crass what do you call it, cultural
Y-
appropriation,
Yeah,
because
well,
yeah,
just to say, I don't know if I coined this term or not, but watching it last night, I realized that this is a kind of folksploitation movie,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
right? But
right.
it's saved by the deeper themes that run through it, like you said.
Exactly,
But on the
exactly.
surface, it's wonderful in that way as a
Mhm.
folksploitation movie with all you
Mhm.
get to see all of these rituals and this
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
strange
yeah,
cult. Like I love that. It's really
yeah.
juicy.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And the thing is that, of course, it works in our culture to do that because, Swedes are Swedes, and it's like we're not a harassed minority or have not been exposed to historical trauma. Because if you were to have a similar attitude and work with a genre that you could call even explicitly, yeah, this is just for exploitation. It's just a new kind of horror film, but it wouldn't work if you went to, darkest Africa and made it about sort of a cartoonish display of primitive voodoo.
Yeah, or
No,
like yeah, like a Bwiti cult or something.
yeah,
It
exactly. Or also, it wouldn't work if you had, describing, Jewish money lenders sacrificing Christian babies. That wouldn't float. It's just
maybe
that doesn't
maybe now, I mean,
maybe
the kind of
maybe.
anti-Semitism going on in the US right
Yeah,
now,
yeah.
that might
No, but
actually
the thing
work.
is that no one cares when it's Sweden because it's cute. Swedes are cute, and it's like really no problem. And I totally agree. But there was something there though that irked me, being Swedish, that made me go along with this train of thought or trail that wait, maybe this is actually cultural appropriation too. And then
Hmm.
the follow-up question is, should we care? Not
Hmm.
really, because because it is a great film. And again, I have to say, her smile saves everything because that smile tells people, young people, I think specifically, who watch the film and feel a sympathy with the cult that, yeah, it's okay, she's smiling. Maybe they would have a different feeling about immediately taking a liking to the cult if Dani had, kept on crying that she did so well. But
Hmm.
so I think that we can never know what, Ari Aster's motivation, and maybe one shouldn't talk about motivation. A film is a work of art, doesn't need to be explained. But I believe that this film is like a commercial for this kind of paganism. It doesn't work as a critique of it. It doesn't work as a ridiculing of Swedish customs. It doesn't work as a display of warning
Right.
to young people. It is completely the opposite. I'm sure that kids who watch this will, fuck, this is so cool. I want to join,
Uh, uh, Certainly a lot of them did.
Yeah.
And I do think that the kind of the promotional aspect of it that you're talking about was unintentional. And I'll give you some evidence for that. Um, Close to the end, when they're setting up the ritual burning house,
Yeah.
and they're putting everyone in there, all the sacrifices in there,
Hmm.
and the voluntary sacrificees.
Yeah.
Um, when the elder goes around and gives them the sap of the yew tree,
Yeah.
and he says, feel no pain, feel no fear.
Mm.
Well, the guy that, like Pele's brother, who they give that to, as soon as
Hmm.
the fire starts, he's screaming and
Hmm.
shrieking. And
Mm.
so it raises the question of trust. Like, can we trust these people? Can we trust their ritual, their superstition, or was it all a sham? Was it all for nothing?
Hmm.
And when I was looking for interviews with Ari Aster, I came across a video on YouTube. It's got like 3.5 million views.
Mm.
And the premise is that Midsommar is an example of brainwashing, of cult
Hmm.
brainwashing.
All right.
And it's a young guy who presents it, and he says that smile at the end shows you just how much Dani has been brainwashed.
Hmm.
And if you felt some kind of affinity or longing for the cult, then you've been brainwashed too.
Right, right, right.
And I don't agree, but I do see how that it could be read in that way, you
Mm.
know.
Mm. Yeah, I completely disagree. That's my premise and stuff. That kind of critique presents a moot point because it's so predictable, right? But
Yeah.
again, Ari Aster could equally well have just ended it on a crying note, and then it would have been, the message would have been clearer. But I don't think it matters either way because when you present something that is on the surface so beautiful, so loving, so solar in a way, and then also the fact that the horrible experiences in the beginning with the old people jumping off from the cliff and the guy is helped by being, having his head bashed in. Uh, that is actually a part of Swedish history. Those cliffs exist out in nature where
Mm.
people, when they became decrepit and old, they didn't want to be
Burden.
a burden to the family or the tribe, that they basically went to the forest, either jumped off these cliffs or just went into the forest and died. That's not an evil kind of, pagan thing. And of course, there were also human sacrifices, but then again, that has existed in many primitive cultures. I don't think it does anymore unless you look at war like that. But what I mean is like
Mm.
ritually, magically sacrificing lives has existed in basically all primitive cultures throughout history. So that's not really a relevant point either, because that's usually the critique, especially as we as viewers, we are viewing the film very much initially through the Americans, right? They look
Yeah.
up, and also these British, to the British couple
Mhm.
that are there also for some anthropological purpose. So it's
Right,
them
and
like,
who really freak out in that first
yeah,
ritual where the
exactly.
elders
Yeah,
sacrifice
yeah.
themselves. Yeah.
And I think that from the point of view of occulturation, the film is a giant success in its display of a great pagan lifestyle that will encourage and inspire young people to, strive for something, maybe not as extreme, but to be closer to nature, to use psychedelics, to be and feel nature and revere the what do you call it? The generative energies, and
Mhm.
also, of course, to discard the horrible programming that comes from monotheist religions and that kind of darkness and shaming and putting a lid on the unconscious. That it's Freud's return of the repressed. What we're seeing now with all the havoc and horror and violence is the return of the repressed, stemming from the monotheist um, indoctrination for generations, for hundreds of years, for millennia. And it's really sad. And that's why I think that there are so many things going on, not only films like this, but you could take more mainstream stuff. Taschen, the publisher, their Esoterica series, I think there are now 6 books out, beautiful, completely mainstream, about different aspects of magical history, astrology and tarot and whatever. And I don't find it surprising at all. It's just going on in our culture. Time to wake up to a world of magic. And I think Midsommar and also many other films. There was one British film called The Ritual, from 2017. I don't know if you've seen that one. It's
Mm.
about some Brits who also go, incidentally, to Sweden and have, a folk horror experience. But it's the same thing. It's this kind of romanticizing of a country that has a very vibrant pagan history and a strong love of nature. We have to
Mm.
keep in mind that Sweden was the last country in Europe to become officially Christianized in 1124. That's like, I don't know, 800 years after everyone else in a way. So that's interesting also. Uh, so in a way, it's kind of a romantic area, Scandinavia, and you have the Vikings TV series, and it's about this conflict between emerging Christianity and old pagan times. And I know for sure which side the kids who are watching this are on, which team they're rooting for. It's certainly
Mhm.
not the clerics coming from Rome.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was a lot like the Avatar effect. that at once kind of inspired people. But the thing about the Avatar effect was that it was so otherworldly that it kind of it amplified that sense of longing to belong to a
Yeah,
tradition and to a community and to have this
yeah,
nature connection, whereas Midsommar is a lot closer to home.
yeah,
Um, Right? Like people
yeah.
watching it, the Anglo North Americans who have this longing can see it and go, "Oh my God, that
Hmm.
we could actually kind of recreate this in our own way." And
Yeah,
then you have, resurgence of interest in paganism, neo-paganism. People are like taking rune classes, and they're
yeah,
throwing
yeah, yeah,
throwing runes like tarot cards now.
yeah.
Um, one of the things that I wanted to talk with you about was, okay. I think I don't know much about Ari Aster's history, but
Hmm.
watching this movie as someone who has done many like psychedelic ceremonies in different contexts, including a religious cultic
Hmm.
context, I
Hmm.
feel like he got so much about the psychedelic and ritual experience right. Like
Hmm.
even the beginning when they stop before entering the village, and it's like they
Hmm.
have to kind of they have to make this transition from the outer world to
Yeah.
the sanctified uh community. And so they stop and they kind of cleanse themselves of all the kind of outer world stuff by taking
Hmm.
mushrooms and communing with nature and each other.
Hmm.
And then even the way the psychedelic experience was depicted with the subtly shifting
Yeah.
plant
Beautiful.
material and stuff. I mean, to me, I just every time I watch it, I have a kind of a flashback to all these other
Hmm.
experiences of mine.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think that I totally agree, and I think that amplifies my point of view also, in the sense that if it had been all negative, all cheesy, all sensationalistic, all pizzazz, those scenes wouldn't have been so subtle and sensitive and correct in that
And
sense.
evocative, yeah.
Yeah, evocative, exactly. And then you can also argue that, yeah, you have the script, right? In the script, maybe it says um, they take mushrooms and have psychedelic experience. That in itself means nothing. But if you have a vision and you work with a set designer and the camera people and the people doing post-production to get those effects right, and this, I think that's very much a cooperative work where people who are experienced will say, let's do it more like this. This is more like it. But again, it is a moot point because the film is what the film is, regardless of what Ari Aster wanted the effect to be. You cannot control how people will react to your work of art. That's a dynamic between the creator and the partaker in a way. But I do agree that it's very well made, those scenes, and they are, of course, very, very symbolically important because that's when Dani connects with nature. And that's really what I think the film is about, being coming from an urban, dark separation from the earth, but also from the ancestors with her sister and her parents. She's completely uprooted. So
Hmm.
now the roots, the soil come through to save her in a way. And I think yeah, that's beautiful. And again, I think also that's why this cult or this little tribe will appear, or, they do appear as being very, very positive because they have a positive integrated approach to psychedelics, in this case, mushrooms. And I
Well,
think,
everything. I mean, there's so many psychedelics in this.
yeah, yeah,
There's the mushrooms, there's the special tea, there's
yeah,
a dust that gets blown in the guy's
yes,
face.
yeah,
I mean, they pulled out all the stops in terms of
yeah, 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 yeah,
natural
absolutely.
psychedelics.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. One of the themes that, again, in this rewatch, I was just really struck by was the way the film depicts moral relativism.
Hmm.
And you talked about this in the way that Americans viewed Swedish liberal attitudes towards
Yeah.
sex. It really plays out in this film. Like the Americans and the Brits, they come into this community with their own sense of morality. And but
Yeah.
the people inside are like so matter of fact. Well, of course, this is the way we think about death, and this
Mm,
is a beautiful,
mm,
joyous occasion when someone reaches 72 years and
yeah.
gives themselves back to the earth.
Mm,
It's regenerative, and and
mm,
and and on and on. Like even when Christian, horrified, says to the elder woman that he's meeting with, "Oh, I think I found like a pubic hair in my meat pie," and she says, "Oh, that
mm.
sounds about right."
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And again, it's all depicted on those murals in the beginning when they come there. Um, and it's just yeah, it's amazing, amazingly clever. And I think also one interesting point concerning the, generative energies, because you have a tight-knit, close um, tribe or community, which would possibly mean um, incest and degeneration of the
Mhm,
genetic pool. But then, of course, that's why Pele is out there to at least secure one suitable person for rejuvenation, literally, of the gene pool. But then, on the other hand, they are also so um, skilled and knowledgeable, apparently, that they also allow for incestuous breeding in terms of the oracle or the oracles, who are actually in charge of, I would say, maybe some more shamanic work in working with this book of life that they have and that they see as a sacred book in a way. So
mhm,
that's a kind of dichotomy also, which shows that it's not just completely pagan blah blah. It's about genetic knowledge also, meaning that to maintain our community's health, we need new genetics coming in,
mhm.
which Christian reluctantly provides, I think. And so that's one thing. But at the same time, they have the yeah, I would call it a shamanic force that is the product of incest and probably
Mhm.
inbreeding of for many many generations, if you take into account how he actually looks,
Yeah,
how that person looks.
yeah,
So it's yeah, incredibly fascinating.
yeah. Well, that's another great example of it all depends on your perspective, right?
Yeah.
So the American anthropologist, he's talking to the elder about their oracle, who is a product of inbreeding and has got physical deformity and some kind of mental deficiency. And
Hmm.
the anthropologist is like tripping over his words, trying to talk to him about this oracle because the only language he has is that of disability. And
Yeah.
the elder is just very matter-of-factly saying, "Well, look, he's unclouded by by mind, by the
Yeah.
typical thoughts that we have that cloud
Mm-hmm.
our mind, and so therefore he's more open to source, and so
Mm-hmm.
he can channel from source to keep writing this book of life, which is never
Yeah.
done." I
Yeah.
thought that was actually kind of beautiful.
Yeah, no, of course it is. Absolutely. And that's the thing, which the film so clearly displays also, because it's not just like, whoa, look at the freak show. This cult is like a freak show. Because what happens then is that the academic energy uh, crosses the boundary. It transgresses, it goes into its own taboo by going into that space and taking pictures with the phone and the flash of the book, although told not to.
Hmm.
The academic greed or the Western American Anglo-Saxon hubris
The
allows
extractivism. Hmm.
yeah, allows for that transgression and real tangible cultural appropriation. But there's a price to pay, and he pays with his own life for that. And whether he's becomes part of the nourishment of the others in terms of cannibalism or not, you can certainly see his foot sticking up from the little garden patch.
In one of the many wonderful, funny, hilarious moments. I mean, the camera just pans and you see his foot sticking out of the garden.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. No, but I think that's also, it's not ad verbatim, but it's a similar kind of playfulness that was around in Wickerman. where
Hmm.
everything was so normal for the Summer Isle people. This beautiful, warm, loving, humorous approach to it that, for the Christian policeman must have been, a horror, absolute horror, because it's not only about attributes, like, I pray to this God, you pray to these gods. It's a complete permeating lifestyle. It's not just about, wearing a cross or saying your prayers. Yeah, it's totally immersive. And again, the question, especially after having rewatched Midsommar, is whether in Wickerman they hadn't lured the policeman there to be sacrificed, because that girl who claims to be missing or murdered or whatever, she's not missing or murdered. So someone must have, called that policeman to come to the island to investigate something that they had actually set up. So that
Hmm.
makes sense too, then, that they somehow invite or choose, in this case, in both cases, a Christian, either by name or by religion. But I think the biggest kick is not the Christian here per se, but it's the academic approach, the distant, abstracted approach. They're studying anthropology, but they have no clue about the world and how it works, you know,
Hmm.
and they can never find out with their kind of approach to
Hmm.
studying the world. Whereas I think Dani has a much more well, she's not an anthropologist, she studies psychology, and
Yeah,
there's
that was
this
funny.
phrase in the beginning where she says, yeah, psychology, that's how you know you're crazy, right? It's just in passing, but it's really wonderfully funny also, because she's not the crazy one. She's probably the most sane one of everyone in the film, but
Hmm.
she passes all the tests, whereas the academics are all off to do anthropology in other states of consciousness.
Hmm. The film as a whole has so many moments where it's challenging us as viewers to question our kind of moral and ontological reality.
Hmm.
And I'm thinking about that scene where the kind of the bumbling friend, I forget his name, but he goes and pisses on the ancestor tree.
Yeah.
And one of the guys freaks out. He's like, "You're
Yeah.
pissing on my ancestors." And the guy's
Hmm.
like, "Well, it's just a dead tree."
Mm.
And you know, the film, like, there's not many films that get the kind of the Western or Anglo North American viewer questioning their perception of things so much as in this film. And I don't think that was the intention at all, but like it really is effective in that way.
Hmm.
Hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. And I wonder, I think almost for sure we would have to check that. But I think the guy who reacts so strongly to his pissing on the tree is the guy who also volunteers to go into
Yeah,
the. Yeah, that's him, right? Yeah.
yeah.
So that's also kind of interesting that he is so engaged and aggressive, yet maybe that is also a taboo that he has to pay for by becoming a volunteer in a way. I was also thinking of when I was writing about this, have you read Shirley Jackson's The Lottery, that short story?
Yeah, they totally play at that when they're
Yeah,
picking like the last
picking the
person, and
balls. Yeah,
and they have the bingo balls going
yeah,
around, and also the little track that the ball comes down.
yeah.
That is a prop from the TV show Survivor. There's a
Hmm.
game that they play in that show, and it's made of this
Hmm.
metal track, and you've got to keep these balls on the track. Like my wife and I were watching it, I said, "Oh my God, that's the Survivor game," which is
Hmm.
also kind of funny.
Yeah, 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 absolutely. It's Meta, a film school director. Well, that's cool.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, but I totally thought of the lottery. He's definitely playing on
Mm.
that there. Wicker
Yeah,
Man, like you said, is a
yeah.
big part of it. Yeah, fantastic film. Like one of the things also, like on the third viewing, I was able to pay more attention to the soundtrack of the
Yeah,
film, which is like all of Ari Aster's films have incredible soundtracks.
yeah,
And
yeah.
this one done by the artist Haxon Cloak, which
Mm.
is a great name. He's obviously into witchery and the occult.
Yeah.
but he's a
Yeah.
British guy. Um, but there is something about like, because the film takes place all in daylight, which is really
Mhm.
unique for a kind of a horror movie.
Yeah.
Like everything is shown in this bright light.
Mhm.
And so you're not able to rely on the typical tropes of horror, things
Mhm.
happening in the shadows, the creepy. I mean, the score is creepy, but it's also kind of solar in its own way.
Mhm.
Like it's full of
Mhm.
these kind of major sounds, but with like a bit of dissonance or the kind of
Yeah.
naturalness that comes from primitive instruments and voices chanting in a kind of close to harmony, but not quite right on the
Mhm.
money, which I really love.
It's amazing. I can strongly recommend that you check out the book with the manuscript because it has a huge section on the even the scores,
Mm,
and explaining the scores, how they were developed and for different scenes. And yeah, it's very nothing is random. It's very well thought through and executed and performed. And I think it's a big part of it, absolutely. And I think that. Um, I think it adds to the film's brilliance, actually. And it's also vocal treatments in general. I think one key scene is, of course, when Dani is freaking out and all the women and the girls specifically help her, take her aside, and create this kind of female community where they basically like primal therapy, like
mhm,
Janov, this kind of screaming, breathing, breath work. And it's so powerful. And it's also, I thought about that the most recent time I saw it, it's like that's a piece of music also that is
mhm,
simply so universal, so primal, so uh, general that it's astoundingly beautiful, I think.
mhm. Yeah. And again, like it's an example of how the film is showing us the dichotomy between the way Western psychiatry treats trauma and the way it was treated in traditional, and still is in a lot of
Yeah.
traditional communities,
Hmm.
where it's a communal, cathartic process. It's
Yeah.
people. There's nothing more intimate than people breathing together in that
Hmm.
rhythmic way.
Yeah, no,
Um,
absolutely. That's
yeah.
actually what the origins of the word conspiracy, conspiration. You breathe together, right? One thing that struck me also as being, because we talked about these tapestries or murals that, in a way,
Mm,
tell the story of the film already in the beginning. There's also, I don't know if you thought of that, but in Dani's apartment in the U.S., where she's grieving, and Christian comes and she's like, I have to say, Florence Pugh, the ultimate crier, this
she's pretty
side
good.
of the millennium, she's fantastic. But there is a tapestry on her wall, which
Mm,
is a weird, Kali-like figure, a woman nurturing one small human or a baby, but standing in a sea of dead babies and or dead small humans.
mm,
You should rewatch that or find that scene because that's also like where art, integrated art becomes oracular in a way. It sort of
mm,
that also tells the story about what's going to happen, where she sort of emerges as the strong woman, whereas all these babies, meaning or probably American men, get, get lost and get killed, basically. It's
mhm,
yeah, also kind of a smart, I would say typical film school shtick
mm.
to intimate those things, but it works. It really works.
Yeah. Um, even the opening scene, which is basically a still of a painted mural done in a kind
Yeah,
of folky style.
yeah,
If you go back after watching the film, this is the nice thing about watching it on a video, is that you
yeah,
can go back to the beginning after watching the whole film, and you see in that mural, it's got the whole story played
yeah,
out
exactly.
in this
Yeah,
kind of triptych.
yeah.
And I love that. And then, then it opens up like a kind of a cabinet door, and then you
Hmm.
enter the film. But he
Hmm.
gives everything away from the beginning if you're paying
Yeah,
attention, and you
yeah.
see that it's like it's it's really showing you like this is
Hmm.
what's going to happen, and then you're
Hmm.
still kind of fascinated by the film enough that you're in it
Yeah,
the
yeah. No,
whole
I think
ride.
it's a brilliant approach, absolutely brilliant, and also psychologically savvy in the sense that he's not just like programming, but he's opening the door via the symbolic, and then it takes us into the real of the film, which in
The quote
itself is
unquote real. Yeah.
yeah, 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 exactly.
Hmm. Yeah. Um, is there anything else about the film? I wonder, like, I'm just thinking about all of the things that I was making note of, and I think we've talked about them, but is there anything else about this film that you haven't said?
I am actually going to look through my talk here. I have it printed to see if
Uh-huh.
because there's simply so yeah, like references to actual paganism. Of course, there's a lot of runic stuff there, and I don't think that came specifically from Aster, but probably from the Swedes who worked with him, and also the fact that this celebration it takes place over 9 days. 9 days was the time where Odin, the highest gods in the Nordic pantheon, he hung himself from a tree, the world ash, for 9 days to acquire the knowledge of the runes. So that's sort of like a basic knowledge that kids learn about even in school here
Hmm.
when we talk about these things. So that's an obvious reference, and then also the fact that they're having is it lunch or dinner at a table that is shaped like the one of the runes, basically the rune called Udal, which means hearth or homestead, but it's also the corresponding O for Odin. So that's kind of there's a lot of that kind of um, not in jokes, but simply references to
Yeah.
real Nordic paganism there.
I was wondering about that, like if someone actually knew how to read runes, like to go through, because there's so many runes in very kind of specific and conspicuous places in the film.
Hmm.
I was wondering like how much kind of even subtext there is in the film if you're actually to read into it and know something about Nordic paganism.
Yeah, I don't know. That will be a topic for another other discussion. I think mostly it's there for aesthetic purposes to
Mm,
evoke this kind of Nordic mystery that I think unfortunately most people will go, "Ooh, that's scary," that's some Nazi stuff or whatever.
mm,
And also those who are interested will try to make sense of it. But what I could see, if being fairly knowledgeable about it, is that it makes no sense. It's there for aesthetic purposes, like triggers in a way, to show that this group has that kind of lineage, but it's also more specifically like a solar agrarian cult, and one that deals favorably with life itself, meaning they use the generative force, sexuality, and sex as part of their religious life, and also psychedelics, of course. So I wouldn't pay too much attention to anything literal being sampled from runic history or the Nordic pagan history. I think it's a kind of a potluck. You take elements that work
yeah,
well for the film, and I don't mind that at all.
yeah.
That's the same thing with Vikings, the TV series. It was great
Mm.
fun, but it wasn't historically accurate. But we don't care when we watch it, right?
Yeah, that's the part of the folk exploitation that I enjoy. It's just like, yeah, I want
Yeah,
to
yeah,
see
yeah.
all, like throw it all in there. I want to see all this stuff.
Yeah, 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 I agree.
Did you have any thoughts about like if there was any symbolic significance to Christian being put in the skin of the bear at the end? Like I don't know what the kind of Swedish folklore history is around the bear, but is it there in your history and would that
Yeah,
have
yeah,
some
it is. And
significance?
yeah, I think I don't know of instances where this has happened, like putting someone inside the carcass in a way. However, there is something very, very common, and you know how the Vikings, they used to go into a rage or a frenzy, it's been speculated that they were actually doing amanita, you know, the fly agaric and, you know, turning themselves into a frenzy
Right,
before they were
the
into,
berserker lore.
yeah, that's
Hmm.
it. Berserk. Berserk. What does it mean? It means the cloak of a bear. You know,
Ah,
yeah. Berserk. Björnsärk, berserk. It's basically you clothe yourself in the vestments of a bear. It's also shamanic, where you take the form of your totem animal when you go into battle, and they will help you, right? So that was my first association in that scene, that this weird little wimpy Christian guy I would see him as being honored, for he left his semen in this woman,
hmm.
in the redhead. So he is not just offed; he gets to die while still alive, but drugged inside the bear. He goes as a berserker, as in, you know, clothed in the bear's fur. So I
That's
see it as a
interesting.
kind of a respectful and honoring thing, but it's not because it's because he has left his seed as a sacrifice for the greater good of the community as such. Uh,
Right. And so therefore it would be important for them to transform him through ritual
yeah,
to be a kind of a better, stronger man as the
yeah,
progenitor of the
yeah.
new blood
Yeah,
in the cult.
exactly,
Hmm.
exactly. So in that sense, he does go through a transformation, but of course he's completely clueless because he is Christian. He is a Christian and an
Hmm.
academic to boot, you know. So there's no chance of remedying that fact. He just has to take on this yeah, archetypical or mythological role without being aware of it.
Hmm. Yeah, like a involuntary redemption of some
Yeah, yeah,
kind.
exactly. A real sacrifice in that sense.
Mm-hmm. Now, as yourself being a magical practitioner, one of the things I've been thinking about over the past couple years really is the role of literature in film as as catalysts for transformation, or as like
Hmm.
magical acts that act upon our
Yeah.
psyche.
Mhm.
And I think this could be one of those films because on the surface, yeah, it's a lot of fun. We get to see all the
Yeah.
kind of the cool things that we want to see in a film like this. But there is
Yeah.
so much subtext going on, and
Oh,
there's so
yeah.
much possibility for the viewer to place themselves in the movie. Uh,
Hmm.
you've got a kind of diverse range of characters as the people who
Yeah.
come into it, right? And then many people might have a kind of European ancestry that they're not in contact with. So there's a lot going on there.
Hmm.
Now, is this something that you think about? What do you think about that idea as like the transformative potential of film?
Well, I think about it every day. It's
Yeah.
my obsession and basically my in a way my work, and that I write a lot about these things, and I call it occulturation, like I said in the beginning, where basically something that has been occult moves up through the soil in a way and into the mainstream, and that's usually what's called occulture. But occulture is more of a narrow term because it is the combination of occult and culture. And occulturation could also be moving from the hidden and into the mainstream of various kinds, even, you know, technological or scientific things. But the way I see occulturation today is because like I said, you know, we need to wake up to a world of magic. And films like this, that is so strong in its signal, and that, as you said, has an appeal for many people, whether you're out on a date wanting to see a good horror film, or if you're actually a pagan, or if you know, romanticize this or that or psychedelics. Um, Take into consideration that this is a fairly independent film, right? But with some good marketing, and it's a great film, it has generated a revenue of about $50 million so far. And that's not a small sum. So obviously it hits home, whichever
Hmm.
home, I don't know, but it packs a punch and it hits home. It's I wouldn't say a mainstream film, but it's certainly not a narrow little independent film anymore. It might have been in the beginning. So I think
Hmm.
that there are those films that can be uh, placed just right in the zeitgeist to have that, success. And I think maybe that was more the success of the Swedish producers, this company Be Real,
Hmm.
or Be Real, that suggested this idea to Ari Aster, and obviously were very creative also in the total creation of this film, meaning that there were things in the zeitgeist, perhaps here in Sweden, that Ari Aster brought an American approach to, and then he wrote the script and they worked together on the actual production, and it
Hmm.
became something that is very powerful, and it feels like it's very now,
Yeah.
because American young people, they are either very early on, career oriented, or they're completely medicated or self-medicated or depressed, or all of
Hmm.
these things put together.
Yeah.
So I think to come to a new place where there's sun and community and love and weirdness and psychedelics, it's like a door opening to a much bigger world in a way. And
Hmm.
I think that that's really the storyline, isn't it? You have Dani's adventure, her hero's journey, but it's also about, there's something else out there, or maybe there's something else in here that we have to discover in terms of having a different approach to nature, having a different approach to the earth itself, having a different approach to how we lead our lives. I think really that's the crucial question. And I can
Hmm.
see many, many, many things going on in pop culture, in the academic sphere also, where these subjects, called Western esotericism or whatever, umbrella you have on top of it, it's a big thing. And I think it's more than a fad, it's more than a trend. It's something that is happening on
Hmm.
all levels, all facets of human cultures, maybe specifically Western culture, because it needs to happen, because the causal materialistic groove is going to lead to what's it called, the sixth extinction.
Yeah. I
And
mean, it's obviously
yeah,
run its course on the individual
yeah,
and collective level. Yeah.
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 So I
And
think that the more the merrier, the more of these kinds of messages, whether
hmm.
they're critical or not, doesn't matter, because there is again, the Jungian collective unconscious speaks to us via these artistic antennae and formulators who cannot control their work. They can't
Yeah.
control how kids today or kids in 20 years, 30 years, how they will look at this. They might take it as a prime example exactly of how to do things. We don't know, but in a
Hmm.
way, I hope so. They will take the
Yeah.
cue, take the baton, and run with it.
Yeah. And I would say too that, the filmmakers, the producers, from that Jungian perspective of the collective unconscious and the enantiodromia, which is like
Mhm.
nature rebalancing itself after too much
Yeah,
one-sidedness,
yeah,
that they were
exactly.
perhaps, like maybe Pelle in the film, were unwitting participants in
Hmm.
this renewal transformative process.
Yeah,
And that's the way, I mean, yeah, because how much could he have intended all of these things? And but it's also like what we bring into the viewing of the film, and you can't account
hmm,
for that when you're making the film. And then in that mix, something maybe magical happens. And that's
yeah, no,
that's what I
absolutely.
love about good art, and especially like pop art with with the seed of something more in it, you
Yeah, no,
know?
absolutely. And again, that's why I think it's relevant to make this comparison with the Swedish sin, and the repercussions that had. Because in Sweden, it was just like, the French New Wave of cinema taking a Swedish approach, which meant here showing, tits and ass and actual sex. And it was completely,
Saunas and sex, that's what I
yeah,
say.
yeah, and it's completely natural in a way.
Hmm.
However, when it was exported and became these controversial, bans, censorships, and court cases, it was mostly the case of the producers who saw a chance to maybe change something to make money. Their incentive was to make a lot of money, which, for instance, with the I Am Curious Yellow film, they made a lot of money by pushing through. But it also changed so that American filmmakers could show more sex in their films. So that was an incredible liberalization. In the wake of the psychedelic, revolution or whatever you want to call it, were some, miracle drug that was used clinically seeped out and then became, illicitly produced and changed culture forever. And it's still, we can still feel the repercussions of that. So I think
Mm.
that there needs to be at the right time some kind of transgression that provokes. But once, as they say, when the cat is out of the bag, you can't put it back. It's just inevitable, undeniable. And I think that's what's going on now with all of these magical pagan themes, whether it's on, Harry Potter level or much more underground level or black metal music or whatever you want. It exists on all levels of human culture today, meaning cultural expressions that carry a kind of pagan spirit, meaning a restoration of and respect for the earth itself.
Mm. Yeah, well, the earth and the sun and the moon and yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Midsommar was certainly responsible for this, well, for whetting the public's appetite for more of this, depiction of paganism, the folk horror, the
Hmm.
folksploitation, whatever we call
Yeah.
it. But
Mm.
the alternative to what people were given with the Protestant and Christian
Hmm.
upbringing that the majority of people who are enjoying these films were brought up within, that kind of
Yeah.
sterility, absence of
Yeah.
icons, absence of color,
Mm.
absence of ritual. Like, oh, we're
Mm.
starved for it. Like our
Hmm.
North American
And
society
also
is totally,
psychological depth,
yeah,
you
yeah.
know.
Well, I mean, that's a big part of this film is it's about like finding meaning in
Mm.
loss, finding meaning in your life, and
Mm.
what is required for us to live a meaningful life. And we see it
Mm.
in the cult.
Mm.
Honoring of the elders, of the stages of life, of the earth and the
Yeah.
sun, of sex and death,
Hmm.
ritual, community, all of these
Mm.
things are what gives a
Mm.
life meaning. And
Yeah.
man, we are just devoid of most of those things in the culture
Hmm.
that we're given. And so
Exactly.
I think, we have to step outside of the culture and we have to, in a way, create our own microculture within the larger
Hmm.
culture. That's the only
Yeah.
way we can survive.
I agree completely.
Hmm. We've got a little more time. I'm just curious to ask you,
Mm.
because it's something that I've been thinking about a lot, particularly recently, but certainly over the past 6 to 8 years, where Trump has come on the political scene.
Mm.
And, leading up to this new presidential election, I'm kind of sitting back, I'm up here in Canada at a safe enough
Mm.
distance from the epicenter
Hmm. Yeah.
that I can have like a certain perspective on it, I think, because I'm not so like emotionally caught up in the whole
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
Although there are certainly Canadians who are, to me, inexplicably emotionally caught up in the whole
Yeah.
drama.
Yeah.
Even though, it doesn't affect us directly, but certainly American politics affects us. We live right beside them. Uh,
Hmm.
but I've been thinking a lot about, especially when I hear like liberal New Agers and Jungians demonize Trump and get
Mm.
totally caught up in what I think is accurately called Trump derangement syndrome, because
Mm.
it's completely irrational to me to put
Mm.
everything on this one figure and to even ignore the kind of eccentricities or shortcomings of the liberal candidate.
Mm.
Like they're not giving equal analysis to both sides in their
Mm.
kind of Jungian archetypal analysis of
Yeah.
these
Yeah.
figures, right? It's all of it is put onto Trump. And I'm like, if anyone should be able to see when they're when they're when they're being captured by a complex, or they're unconsciously engaging in projection of the shadow, it should
Mm.
be Jungians.
Mm.
But I
Mm.
keep hearing people of a Jungian orientation
Mm.
engaging in this demonization of Trump.
Mm.
And I'm like, well, you're the people who talk so much about the kind of usefulness of the trickster, or the necessity of the trickster figure
Yeah.
in
And the shadow.
transformation,
Yeah.
in renewal. Yeah, and doing your shadow work and all of that.
Mm. Mm.
And yet, when the trickster appears, you recoil in horror and fear, and
Mm.
you want to destroy him.
Mm.
Okay, so that's kind of like where what I've been sitting with. Do you have any thoughts about this from your kind of magical, psychological perspective?
Yeah, I think it's very, very interesting because of course you can apply, put on those goggles and look at it from a Jungian or a magical perspective or both, or simply a, everyday political perspective. I think that the reason why this is so confusing, and I think to everyone, regardless of, which side you favor or which candidate you favor, is that it's really not taken place before. Because even the previous one, 2016, I think specifically the liberals didn't really think that it was going to happen, right? But it did
Well, yeah.
happen because, for various reasons. But now we're at a point where history is repeating itself with a kind of an exponential speed increase and
Mm-hmm.
tension increase also, that I think it's hard for people to use the same models of analysis as, for instance, with Bush and Obama. They were both basically on different sides, but they played the same game.
Mm-hmm.
Politics up to Trump was the same. It's the pendulum swinging back and forth. But I think what's confusing now is that there seems to be a new game board, a new rules almost, where one candidate is flaunting, in a way, kind of a total honesty in saying that, when I get the power, again, when I get the power, I will upheave certain things that have been part of, what you could call, the degeneration or the swamp or whatever he calls
Mm-hmm.
it. And I think that's shocking to the side that's used to the normality. But obviously, it means something, at least in attitude and approach, to the 50% now that seem to be going to vote for him. So we're in a completely new situation where the old is being upheaved. Even if Harris wins, it has still been upheaved because there will be a disgruntled 50%, possibly doing more stuff like the Capitol or whatever, depending on the outcome. So it's
Well,
not a pretty scenario.
yeah, well, and look, central to her campaign is this whole idea that it's she's of a new generation. She's going to be
Yeah,
involved in turning the page, even though
yeah,
she's been helped write the book for the past 3.5 years.
yeah,
Regardless of that,
mm,
there's still this idea of renewal. But I think from the liberal perspective, they see Trump as maybe doing something more destructive, more
mm,
totalitarian, whereas
mm,
Harris's change is going to be a softer, gentler, more
yeah,
joyous change, which is far
yeah,
more acceptable to the mass,
yeah,
or at least
yeah. Well,
50%.
that remains to be seen, right? In two
Yeah.
weeks,
Oh,
we'll
yeah.
see. Yeah, so I think it's incredibly interesting, and it would be even more so if it were contained to the US. But unfortunately, it's not contained to the US. And I usually tell my wife, who is an American, that the best countries in the world are the ones you never hear about. And we actually take Canada as an example. You never hear about Canada. That must
Mhm.
be a really good country. And I don't know what it's like for the Swedish image abroad. I hope that people don't hear about Sweden because usually when there's nothing in the news, it means that everything's pretty okay.
Oh,
However, the
yeah.
US, they're in the news every fucking minute. So something
Mm.
is not well, I think.
Well, a part of that is like from an outsider perspective, my God, there's no more compelling entertainment on the tube at
That's
this
right.
moment,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah,
And
yeah, yeah.
so
No,
my wife,
absolutely.
my wife and I are watching some of the commentary shows like after
Yeah,
dinner, and we're just like, oh
yeah,
I can't believe this
yeah,
is what's going on. It just
yeah,
seems
yeah,
like
yeah, yeah.
something you couldn't write for an HBO show. Um,
Yeah, no,
but I'll t
absolutely. And also, it's like it's scripted by Burroughs and Ballard together. It's so weird. My wife says that all the time. You can't make this shit up. It's weird.
That's funny. Burroughs and Ballard, if they got together and
Yeah,
wrote a socio-political thriller or something or
yeah, or
commentary.
comedy.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Dark comedy. I mean, what you're saying about like the best countries, the ones you don't hear about. There's some truth to that. Like we went on like two recent trips to the US, and I hadn't been in quite a while actually, since
Mm.
kind of pre-pandemic, I think. And so going back especially to California and seeing a lot of the disparity between the rich and the poor, and we
Yeah,
just did a trip to Portland, Oregon, which it's dystopian, that city
I know.
currently.
I know.
Um, and so coming home, I had uh, a renewed appreciation for how kind
Mm.
of boring our little
Yeah,
corner of the world
yeah,
is.
yeah, yeah,
You
yeah,
know,
yeah.
and I
Great.
felt it so palpably. I came back, I'm like, it's so clean and quiet and boring.
Yeah.
And I'm really thankful for that.
Yeah, yeah, no, I feel exactly the same way here in Sweden. It's a joy because then at least you are the disturbance and volume and madness is not enforced on you. You can just turn the TV off or don't look at your phone, and you're in a peaceful situation. You're in a peaceful life and a peaceful place, and
Uh,
that's a real privilege that we should be incredibly grateful for. Because I think no matter what happens in 2 weeks there will be turmoil
mm,
back and forth for a long
yeah,
time, unrest, perhaps even violence, unfortunately. But it's just, it seems to be, yeah, maybe it's become so inert as a political system and as a country as such that it needs a bit of shaking up. I mean, that's already
yeah,
happening, but I just hope it works out for the best, whatever happens, because again, the repercussions are global,
yeah,
you know, depending on who leads, and it affects the financial markets, it affects yeah, peace or
yeah,
war. It affects many, many things.
yeah.
So it's not an optimal situation, but well, as you say, it's fascinating to watch from a distance.
Safe distance. Well,
Yeah,
Carl, this has been really great speaking with you. I appreciate it. And I hope to talk soon. I know you're always putting out new work, and so there's always something new to talk about with you. And
absolutely. And
yeah,
I think you hit my sweet spot in this case because I seem to be writing more and more and more about films and doing these kinds of analyses of films. So I hope that we can talk more about some other films some other time.
oh, for sure. I'd love that. Yeah. Okay, great. Take care.
All right. Take care, man. Bye.
Bye bye.